all that kind of junk. But Lotus 123 was just catching on. Remember, that was a $700 program.
Yeah.
Okay, $700 program. But it was catching on. But the reason that it did so well in the marketplace was they had custom video drivers. So Lotus 123 didn't use, Interrupt 21 or whatever you use for MS-DOS video. They wrote their own hardware drivers. So again, another answer to a trivia question: what was the first commercial available program that had video drivers? So who invented the concept of a video driver? It was Lotus 123. A lot of people think of, video drivers for games or video drivers for video cards. But it was Lotus 123 who had the idea of, we're going to have a separate video driver that's computer dependent and specific, so that we could make our hardware run fast, and we can have our own fonts, and we can have our own spacing, and we're not dependent on whatever sloppy hardware and BIOS implementation, right, is done in these low-end computers. And I was present at this meeting, and it's going to be part of my Mostly True Tales book I'm writing about my days at Tandy. I'm plugging my book. That Mitch Kapor flew all the way from, I think it was in Massachusetts, if I was not mistaken, to have this big meeting to sit down. And so I was the hardware representative, and George Robertson was the software representative. And Mitch Kapor gave about a 3-minute talk about how he couldn't wait to put Lotus 123. He's already assigned 9 engineers, which is a lot, right? I mean, there's more. We only had 4 engineers on the Model 2000. So he is going to have 9 engineers just to port Lotus 123. What he needed was the schematics for our video side. Like, what chip did we use, and blah, 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 where the memory map was. Okay. And the meeting went very poorly, let's say. It lasted, so after he talked and after the argument, he stormed out, got back on a plane, and we didn't have Lotus 123 on the Model 2000. So then when Model 2000 launched, the #1 business software in the world wouldn't run on it.
I've got a copy of Lotus 123 for it here, so they must have resolved whatever problem that was.
So I think what happened was they reverse engineered it.
Okay.
Well, actually, what had happened, and I'm not sure why, but there was a sudden reversal in Tandy, and there was that internal white book of the Tandy 2000 schematics and all the technical reference, and then all of a sudden that showed up as a store item with schematics and everything.
Well, this is also interesting, to be kind of a little bit morbid. George Robertson all of a sudden dropped dead one day. And I guess Eric Schmidt took his place, didn't he, Mike? I think Eric took George's place. And so that kind of, that problem solved itself.
Yeah.
But again,
George was a very, I don't want to say he was building little kingdoms, but he was almost paranoid about anyone knowing anything outside the department. He was very protective of their knowledge base, and he wanted to keep it inside that department. And you probably saw that with the disk duplication routines. They went, he just about threatened to have anyone fired that got a hold of any of the disk duplicating software for the Model 2 and for the Model, the Model 3.
A lot of the decisions that were made on both the Tandy and the Radio Shack side, even in retrospective, at least from my viewpoint, just didn't make a lot of sense. To be blunt, sometimes in hindsight you go, well, looking back, yeah, it didn't make sense. But even at the time, it was just a series of very unusual decisions. I mean, when the CEO of Lotus 123 flies to have a meeting with you and says, I have 9 people to port it, what would you expect the answer to be? I'd be like, please, it's like, why wouldn't you say yes? Why would you say no to that?
Okay.
And the only reason was an artificial constraint, and it was completely artificial, that we're going to keep this a secret for whatever reason. I never could quite figure out exactly what the reason was.
I think a lot of that grew out of the original Model 1. And with the Model 1, there was outside people like Wayne Green going to 80 Microcomputing, and all the other magazines. And he tried to step in with the knowledge, creating his own knowledge base with the Model 1. And Radio Shack immediately became possessive of that. And then when the Model 2 was in development, word of it leaked out to people at Byte Magazine and to Wayne Green and those guys. And by the time when the Model 16 came out, Tandy was just incredibly paranoid about anyone outside the company knowing things. You remember the stink over that game that went out the door, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm still convinced to this day that there was someone inside of Tandy leaking information to Wayne Green. I'm serious.
Well, isn't that the point of a PR department, to sort of get the news out there about these things? It kind of seems a whole lot backwards.
Well, you have to understand the culture that grew up there at Tandy Systems Design, which was the R&D thing, is that before the Model 1, you had a group of managers and engineers who were building things like answer machines, cordless phones, weather radios, and flashlights. So there's not a lot of secrecy in that, right? And there's also not a lot of people. You don't need that many people, physical people, to do that kind of work. You don't need a lot of sophisticated test equipment to do that kind of work. And you don't need a formal system of software and QA and packaging. I mean, we weren't shipping things that weighed a whole lot, except for stereos, and we didn't even do those. Those were done in South Korea, so no one at Fort Worth had to worry about shipping a 60-pound stereo around to the stores. But when the computer stuff hit, they didn't know how to scale, because they might have been building sofas. It was so foreign to them. And
we actually built furniture.
Yeah, Sullivan, right?
Sullivan, yeah.
So the point is that they didn't have a formal system in place, nor did they hire anybody who had serious industry experience, like somebody who worked 20 years at Hewlett Packard, or someone who worked 10 years at IBM, or any place like that. Okay, they didn't hire those kinds of peoples, and so they just flew by the seat of their pants more than anything. And so when they tried to keep, I can remember them desperately trying to keep the Model 16 secret, and the reason was their ties with Motorola. You have to understand that from about 1981 to 1987, Tandy was Motorola's #1 customer in the world. Okay? And that had a lot of clout. And Motorola was trying to get that 68,000 designed in somewhere. Until the Model 16, the only design win that Motorola had was for a point-of-sale terminal for Chick-fil-A. The reason I know that was my college roommate designed it. And so that's why it was not necessarily Tandy trying to keep it a secret as much as Motorola, because they really wanted to rub it into Intel and IBM's face. Kind of like, see, 68,000 is a valid thing, and it is a good thing. I remember the day that our Mike Capillo, who was our Motorola sales rep brought in the 68,000, and it had, it's a big, ceramic dip package, right? 68 pins, I think. And it had a number laser engraved on it, and the VP of engineering had to sign a legal notarized document that if we blew it up, we had to pay them $10,000. And they gave us one, and we were afraid to even touch it. Like, I ain't even touching that. But that's the kind of level that was around the Model 16.
Well, when Candy got further along with the 16 development, they opened it up to other groups within the company. And for the Model 16, I was this is before I transferred into R&D. I was in tech support, and I was sworn to secrecy, and I was not even allowed to tell anyone else in tech support about the 68,000. And I had one at my desk, but it was in a Model 2 case, so no one would know. And then one accidentally got shipped to a customer, by the way. That's another story.
Yeah.
Well, when the Model 2 came out, it was a disaster when they shipped the first 10 machines. Well, first 9, because they never got shipped. They just didn't handle the shipping very well.
They all broke. They were all DOA, weren't they? Like, I think the power supply.
The power supply and the power
sheared off.
supply and the video, it didn't shear off, but it bent. The whole thing was the U. You got a plate in the bottom, and then you got on the left side, you got this power supply and video card. And it's not really that heavy, but on the right, you got a disk drive. And the machine was over 50 pounds, which means it couldn't go UPS, it had to go by truck. So people who were trying to ship it later in repairs and stores were trying to skip unpacking. But anyway, they shipped this thing down to Florida, and I had to fly down, and 10 customers were scheduled to get them early. And every one of them showed up at the faceplates all smashed because of the reflection of the fabric. There was no upper supports in the cases, and that had to be fixed. Well, when the Model 16 came out, they said, "Tell you what, let's ship them up to Philadelphia to the warehouse, and then ship them back, and examine them for damage." Well, they did, but they put it in Model 2 boxes, and the Philadelphia warehouse, somehow got a couple of boxes mixed up. So the factory got these 10 boxes back from Philadelphia warehouse, and they opened them up, and there were 9 Model 16s and 1 Model 2. Well, where's the 10th Model 16? No one knew. Well, the factory wouldn't tell anybody about it. And then all of a sudden, one of the customer service guys comes over and goes, "What's a Model 16?" And I said, "What?" And so I ended up going over there. We called the customer, and sure enough, he had a white machine with a tandem disk drive in it. It was a Model 16. We had to get non-disclosure documents up to this guy. He became a beta site for us, and I sent him the 2.0D so it would work on both the patches to make 2.0D so everything would work. And he had bought 4 Model 2s, 3 for his business and 1 for home. And just thank God he opened up the one at home with the Model 16. And it was funny because he had a private line. He got Cam's personal phone number at Andy because he was not allowed to call anyone else to get help. He had my personal number at the time too. And it really got touchy, the fact that this got out there. I don't think the factory let on to people until much later that it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It was funny when the machine was finally announced, the guy was in the store, and he called us up and said the store was going crazy because they said, "We heard that there's a Model 16, blah, blah, blah." And he was like, "Yeah, I got one at home," It was like, everyone stormed over to his house. It was in Lancaster, PA, of all places.
Yeah, so you were talking about a PR department. So from the Tandy system design standpoint, to keep secrecy, we had every project had a 3-digit number in an alphanumeric designator that we do all internal documents, and we couldn't utter it. Like the Model 2000 was the Model J, as in jump up and down. So when we talk to vendors, we're trying to get price quotes. I think it was also Project 381 or something like that. We would just say, we went a quote on 10,000 capacitors and just put on the quote Project J or the Model J and stuff like that. And we wouldn't even know it was called the Model 2000 until like the day it was announced. So Radio Shack started to even keep the real name and the designator away from Tandy. They wouldn't even tell the people at Tandy what those designators were. I have a list of those somewhere, by the way. I want to put it in my book. The master list.
So
The last master list I had that had all the projects listed.
I want to try to get us a little bit back on track on our history retrospective. Those are all awesome stories, though. Definitely. So we talked about episode 12. Then in March, we had episode 13, where we had our VCF East 2017 preview. And then we had an interview with Jim McGinley. That was Randy. You ran that interview, right? Randy, you still on?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That was fun. Jim was a great guy.
Yeah. And VCF East this year, we talked about it, but there was a competition between the original purpose-built appliance microcomputers, the Commodore PET, and the Apple II and the TRS-80, and we had 3 teams from all 3 brands, and the TRS-80 team, our team, won the first place prize on Best Exhibit, so we're still proud of that. That was myself and my son, Alex, and Kelly Levitt, and Dean and Drew Nardicola were on that team. So we had pretty much one of every TRS-80 model on display, all in working condition. Let's see. So then we shoot into April. What do we have in April? We had episode 14, and that was our Trisvid with George Phillips. So I don't know if how many of you have seen Trisvid yet. George had a demo of it at Tandy Assembly, but it's a pretty slick video player for the TRS-80. Really impressed with George's programming abilities. And we had started talking about Tandy Assembly, and we were talking about previewing for Tandy Assembly, and the lead up to that. We were talking about another Model 3 emulator, a Sharp 80 emulator that came out. But we had a lot. Oh, Bernie Appel. We all know Bernie Appel passed away this year, and I know you Tandy guys, I guess, had a difficult relationship with Bernie, or is that how you would phrase it?
No, I wouldn't call it was difficult. The thing about Bernie was he was stubborn. So I put stubborn and difficult different because I had 2 stubborn children. But he was very impressive as a person. To this day, I've never had anybody or been around somebody who had a better memory. I mean, he literally had a photographic memory, and he would come across as downplaying that, or he'd make comments like, "I don't remember, that kind of stuff," and he was lying. He could tell you every SKU in every store for the last 30 years about how many units they sold and who returned what, and it was just amazing. He knew exactly what he paid for everything. His brain was like a giant spreadsheet, and I was always impressed by that. Now, as his personality, he was very brusque. I guess is that a word? Brusque. He was very short and to the point. He did not joke. He did not kid around. He would, he's from Long Island, Boston kind of area, and it's kind of old school in the sense that he liked to bust your chops, I guess is a way to say it. Okay. If you tried to outswear him, you would lose.
Be like talking to me.
Yeah. But the problem that Bernie had throughout the whole time I was there was his abject refusal to back down on his profit percentage from the computers versus everything else. And to me, that was the most singular reason why Tandy and Radio Shack failed. That was, if you want to point to, like, write down the one reason why it failed, to me, that's the reason. Bernie Appel wanted to get the same gross margin for a micro-channel computer running Xenix as he did for a 9-volt battery, because to him it was just something in the store. He had absolutely no attachment. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the people who were on this podcast and the people who were, watching us on YouTube, we have an attachment to these computers. Computers to us were these mythical, magical things. I would tell my mother, who is non-technical, she goes, "Why do you like computers so much?" And I would say, "It's the most complicated thing I can understand." Okay? And that was true for a lot of people, that if you understood it in your family, if you were the computer guy, you were raised up. So you may be the kid like me who got beat up in gym class in high school, but when I got to be the computer guy, I got instant admiration, right? You were the guy.
Yeah, lifted your status in the family.
Right. And so that has a lot of attraction, and that ability that we found in ourselves, that we could understand the stuff, and it really wasn't that hard, but it seemed hard to everybody else who didn't understand it. Okay? Bernie Appel has about as much interest in computers as I do riding on the back of Mike Yetzko's motorcycle again. Okay? That would be zero. He popped a wheelie on his Honda going 140 down a brick road. That's another story. So,
not 140.
Okay, 120 I exaggerated. But the point is that Bernie did not have that attraction. Okay? He just didn't. And as time went on, and even companies like Compaq, I mean, remember Compaq computers, they cost even more than Tandy did. Okay, people made fun of Tandy's being expensive. A Compaq 286 and a Compaq Desk Pro 386, they cost $1,000 more than Tandy ever did. Okay, but they had only a 38% profit margin. Radio Shack had almost a 70% profit margin. Let that sink in. On a computer, a 70% profit margin. And it was twice of Compaq. And I remember the day that Compaq announced the Desk Pro 386. They did something that someone's never done before, and maybe ever since. They bought a full-page ad in all 9 regions of the Wall Street Journal. So the Wall Street Journal was actually printed in 9 different versions of the Wall Street Journal. So the Wall Street Journal in San Francisco is not the Wall Street Journal in Miami on the same day. Completely different papers, okay? It's regional based. And when you buy ads, you can only buy ads for your region, right? So if you're a St. Louis based bank, you want to buy ads for the Midwest. You don't want to buy ads for Florida. Compaq bought a full page ad in every single region. And that was stunning to people at Tandy. And I actually called up the Wall Street Journal and asked them how much that would cost. It was $1.2 million to do that. Okay, that was more than Tandy R&D's operating budget for the entire year. Okay, and people like myself and other engineers, Rick Thompson, Mike Berger, all these other people, we expressed we vocally expressed concern about this. And we had a little meeting in the conference room where management assured us that Radio Shack had the distribution, because at the time that ad came out, there were more Radio Shacks than McDonald's and 7-Elevens combined. That Compaq, who had a direct sales force, right? If you want to buy a Compaq desk pro, you had to call Compaq and make an appointment, and a guy in a suit and tie would bring it out to you in his car. Okay? That there was no way Compaq would be successful. They had a 38% gross margin, which they could not compete, and they would be bankrupt in 14 months. Did that happen? No. No. So there was this very big disconnect between Bernie Appel trying to figure out where computers were in the world versus what he knew. He didn't know computers, but by God, he knew answer machines and clock radios and stereos and car, CD players. He didn't know computers, and he didn't want to. And I think that was a big problem with Bernie Appel.
I think he was kind of, I reckon that he was, from what I could tell, he was prepared to give a lot of things a shot. And that it should be, remembered for, in that the TRS-80 and its and all the accessories and things was a very vast amount of stuff, and a lot of it that didn't fly particularly well. Think about the MC10 computer and the later versions of the pocket computers and things like that. They could have quite easily said, let's not worry about them or whatever. But he sort of, let's chuck it up the flagpole, see if anyone salutes it.
Right. Well, see, and the reason that he did that was he had so many stores, and he had to, have something new. Everybody likes to buy the new thing. And remember, this is all catalog driven and the Sunday flyer, right?
Mm.
And you had to have new stuff. And people like me who grew up in a Radio Shack store on the weekends, and we looked at that Sunday flyer every Sunday. Probably everybody on this call looked at that Sunday flyer. We were so interested, we would know what was new, right? Our brains would spot something new in that flyer and go, look, there's a new thing. What is the thing? I don't know, it's new. And Bernie knew that. He knew that he would keep track of what sold, and he knew that stuff that was newer at a certain price point, he could move the units. And again, he had no loyalty, so if it bombed, he just blew them out at $10 a piece or whatever and went to the next thing. He was never, he didn't have a resentful memory where he would hold it over your head. Okay? That was a very few times I actually saw him, bring up the past. Okay? He was not that kind of a person. You were right. And so what happened is twice a year, Bernie basically ran his own version of CES in Fort Worth, where, if y'all familiar with the show Shark Tank?
Sure.
That's on.
Yeah.
So it's basically Bernie Appel invented Shark Tank. Bernie Appel was doing Shark Tank in 1977. Okay. Where he had 2 days, and people had basically 3 minutes to present, and they would walk in and they would give a pitch in front of him and Bob McClure, who was the head of Tandy. And Bernie and Bob McClure would basically argue over the tooling, which what we would call NRE, because a lot of the stuff is all plastic injection molding, right? There's always some kind of plastic component, right? And so, that was expensive back then. So a lot of the arguments on whether or not he would put something in the store was based on the tooling cost. But you could bring in anything. You could bring in, fuzzy clock radios and remote control cars and whatever. And if you could take Bernie's verbal abuse, okay, which he liked it if you were a shrinking violent, he didn't like it. But if you just sat there and stared him down, he liked that in people. He would give you a shot, and usually what your shot was like 1,000 units. He'd say, okay, I'll take 1,000. Well, there was like 6,800 stores. That's not even one per store, right? So to him, if it was 5,000 or 10,000, that was just one or two per store. And he didn't see that as a risk. Okay. Are y'all familiar with the term force feed? Have y'all ever heard that term before for the Radio Shack? Force feed?
No.
Mike, tell them what force feed is.
Well, what would happen is that stores they would have these inventory levels, and the store managers had no choice. Stuff from the warehouse got dropped on them.
Right. So Bernie Appel would decide every quarter what was going to show up on your dock, whether you liked it or not. So you better sell it.
Yeah, and there were one of the worst things that can happen to a store manager is you could have something that was a bad product, like the Comp 100 scanner. Those things were notoriously bad quality, but people would put them on layaway, and as a store manager, they'd lie. They'd take them off of inventory when they do inventory so that they wouldn't get dropped one on force feed. But that's how the warehouses didn't have to eat this stuff. It got dumped into the stores, and the store had to eat it. The way the store managers got paid, it came out of their profit.
So jumping back to our retrospective, so also in April, I believe it was in April, it was the annual Cocoa Fest took place in Chicago. Any of the Cocoa guys on the call?
I own some Cocos.
Well, Paul is.
I designed a Cocoa.
Which
Where's
Cocoa?
Mike Robin?
I think Mike dropped off.
I did the Color Computer 2 LC low cost version.
The low cost version.
The one that's in Boise Petrie's book where I broke clowns and balloons. You can read about it in his book. I think it's page 43 or something.
Well, this year's
is that the Cocoa with the K, the Korean Cocoa, or is that different again?
No, it's the U.S. version. It's
okay.
called the LC.
Well, in Australia, we got the Korean Cocoa too.
Yeah.
That was a color burst issue, right, Paul?
Yeah. For those of you, are y'all familiar with Boise's Color Computer book?
Yes.
What I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. I interviewed them for Floppy Days.
Right. So it's
in
there in great detail, but the short version is that. So remember I talked about Bernie Appel having his own version of Shark Tank.
Mm-hmm.
So that was for both Tandy and outside vendors like Sony and Hitachi and Panasonic. So Tandy had one day to ourselves where we would pitch products, and so twice a year, management would come to all the engineers and say, every engineer has to think up at least two things to pitch, okay, and then walk out. And we're like, what? We don't know. So one of the things I thought of was I can do a cost reduction of the color computer. Did I have anything in mind? No, but it got me off the hook. And so I just said, I can reduce the cost of the color computer by $3.84. And they said, great. And then Bernie came back and said, oh, fine, do it. Then I actually had to do it. Okay. And so one of the things I did was I cleaned the board layout up. And so when you buy circuit boards, they come in industry standard size blank panels that are 17 by 23 inches. And the way the original Color Computer 1 and Color Computer 2 boards were laid out was that it took one panel per computer. And I figured out a way to shrink it so I could make the main motherboard the shape of an L. And I could put two L's in a mirror image on one panel. And I could get my $3 immediately on the cost of the blank board without doing anything else except to redesign the board layout. So we redid the board layout, and then when I did it, I found out that whoever laid out the prior boards didn't do a good job in the RF modulator section. Okay, so I made the modulator section really quiet and really clean. I also did a mod where you didn't have to manually trim the voltage to 5 volts. Okay, you could fix it with 2 resistors without a trimmer, and that was also very expensive back then. That was $1 to get rid of that trimming. So I was a hero, except for one small problem. When I sent the unit over to Radio Shack QA, it failed, and the failure was it wouldn't run this game called Clowns and Balloons. And that's what it said. It said, fails to run Clowns and Balloons. I'm like, well, number one, I never heard of that game. Number two, what do you mean it failed to run it? So I got a copy of it, and to me it ran fine. And I sent it back over, and it said it failed again. So finally I stomped over there and pitched a hissy fit, and the guy at the QA department pointed to it and said, it's wrong. That's, on the screen there's a little teeter-totter board with some clown jumping up popping balloons. It's in black and white, he says. I go, well, yeah, it's in high-res mode. It's high-res black and white. So he goes over to an old color computer too and pops it in, and what colors pop up on the screen all of a sudden? Remember the false color mode in the color computer? This little weird orange and blue?
Yeah.
And I said, that's not supposed to be there. That's an artifact. And he goes, nope, you have to put it back in because all of our games are written to take that into account.
Yep.
And so it's a bug. It's not really, a bug is not right. It's an artifact, okay? It's something in the design that's not supposed to be there. And what happens is 3.58 megahertz color burst signal is leaking into the RF modulator, and it's making these little funny colors. And so they made me put a filter, a passive bandpass filter, on the first, I think, 1,200 boards, because we already ordered boards, right? So I had to inject the noise back into my RF modulator so freaking Clowns and Balloons would run. As an engineer, I was not happy.
That was a big seller.
So
that was my first experience with Radio Shack engineering. Was we need to inject some noise here to make this Clowns and Balloons run. Okay, fine. And that's what we did on that.
So Pete, how did the Z80 people get invited to what eventually became Tandy Assembly?
We had some early discussions at the beginning of the year with the Cocoa Fest organizers, and because of the 40th anniversary of the Model 1, we thought this might be a good idea, and the fact that TRS-80s did not have an event. This was prior to Tandy Assembly. So they decided that they would invite the Z80 folks to come exhibit at Cocoa Fest. I was going to go. I was going to plan a big exhibit, but then I had a family issue come up and I couldn't make it. I'm actually not sure if there were any Z80 displays at Cocoa Fest this year.
So is there no dedicated TRS-80 festival anywhere?
Oh, there is now. We have our first this year. Yeah.
There is now.
Yes.
Okay.
So this past October we had Tandy Assembly in Chillicothe, Ohio. Yep.
All right. So Tandy Assembly is now the specific for TRS-80 stuff.
Yes, that's the one that you're coming to next year.
Sure, why not?
And you too, Mike.
Where is it going to be?
Somewhere in Ohio, probably.
Oh God, okay.
Well, the last time I was in Ohio, I was in Dayton, Ohio, at Wright Pat Air Force Base. Snow up to my asshole. So anyway.
Yeah.
Make sure it's in the spring or summer. That's all I gotta say.
So it was a good time of year. The plane flight was killing me, but I'll do it again.
Yeah, so let's talk about Tandy Assembly. I mean, it was really a great success. It was the first one. We had great speakers like Don French was there, Scott Adams, Lance Miklas, really great headliners. And, I think we had
And John Linville.
John Linville was even there, even though he's not here
was
tonight.
any of that taped or videotaped or anything like that? The speaker presentation?
Yep.
The whole thing's tagged from go to woe. You're just going to look for it on YouTube.
Yeah, just look for Tandy
Is it
Assembly.
but is it broken up, or is it one 3-hour thing?
It's mostly broken up into the sessions. Yeah.
'Cause I would like to hear what Don French has to say.
Yeah, you can find it. You'll find it there on the Tandy Assembly channel on YouTube.
Okay.
So that was great. Lots of exhibitors. I think we had over 80 attendees. So for our first exhibit, our first event, it was really a success. And we're definitely having one this year. It'll be in October, somewhere in Ohio, maybe in Chillicothe again. We're not sure.
I actually know someone who lives there, believe it or not.
Perfect.
So I can go visit him.
Who is there?
One of my
Someone knocking
synthesizers.
at the door.
Who's knocking on the door? Not me. No, I'm just saying I've never heard of Chillicothe before until I met this one guy. And his parents run a company that does all the coffee service and repair for all the restaurants and gas stations and stuff in Chillicothe.
So Kurt Ham on the YouTube chat is saying, can't we make it the weekend of my wife's birthday? That killed my trip. Oh, can we not make it the weekend of my wife's birthday?
Oh.
That killed my trip. She just didn't seem to have the same enthusiasm for it that I did.
We can get a cake and sing happy birthday as well as any other bunch of, middle-aged nerds.
You don't want to hear me sing.
I'll second that.
So in May, we had episode 15. That was our episode focusing on TRS-80 software development. That Peter Bartlett and myself went into fairly deep detail of how we develop the TRS-80 software that we develop these days, the tools that we use, and whatnot. And I think the consensus is that, most of the development, at least that we're doing, or I'm doing, so I guess it's not really consensus, but it is that using modern tools on modern platforms and kind of cross-compiling is probably the most efficient manner. But, if you're in it for the retro vintage vibe, then, using the tools on the TRS-80 is an option. You're just going to be way less efficient than you are using, modern cross-compilers. So.
I was going to bring up the software development. I was just going to raise a little side note here. All the Model 100 diagnostics were actually done on a Model 2.
Oh, interesting.
I went through a short period where I managed the export diagnostics group, and we were given the Euro, Euro diagnostics. They were terrible, so I had one of the guys say, well, you're going to have to write some new diagnostics to memory stuff and all the other, diagnostics. And I'm not sure who it was that came up with the idea, and we used the Model 2 assembly language development system and just wrote a macro envelope that sat at the front end that gave us all the 8085 codes, and then wrote a little handler to get all the machine code programs across. So they were all done very quickly on a Model 2, and it just transferred across.
Now, something else that your listeners may find interesting is all of the microcontroller code that we did at Tandy Systems, like for the modems and serial cards and the joystick card and things that little, usually there were Motorola 6805 kind of microcontrollers. They were all written in our own internal language by this guy named Jerry Heap, who did the video text terminal, and we called it Heap code, and that was cross-compiled on his Model 1.
Oh, wow.
That would generate the object code, the hex files, for the Motorola tool to blow into the chip. but we didn't actually write anything in Motorola assembly language. It was all done as macro calls and what we call the heap code. That's HEEP as opposed to programming HEAP. So it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Named after Jerry Heap. So yeah, so we were doing cross compiling, on Model 1s many years ago.
Mm-hmm. And I actually recently interviewed Jerry Heap. He'll be in our next episode, so that interview. So moving along, we took a sort of a summer break in the show, and we didn't come back until August. And then we had episode 16, which was our happy birthday episode, celebrating the Model 1's 40th anniversary birthday. And we also talked to TRS-80 internet celebrity Ira Goldklang. Everybody knows Ira runs the TRS-80.com website, which is sort of the go-to first place where most TRS-80 enthusiasts will get their feet wet with the TRS-80 information available on the web. I also, at that time, I also introduced the TRIS Xenix project, which is another GitHub site that this TRIS Xenix project, which I have here, is focused on keeping TRIS Xenix operating system alive. And essentially what we're doing here, is, although I haven't worked on it in a while, is going in and decompiling and analyzing the Xenix software to eventually allowing us to kind of hack into it and introduce modern peripherals, things like solid-state storage hard drives for Xenix systems. One of our accomplishments was to allow TRIS Xenix 3.0 to run on the early 68K cards. So the 6 megahertz 68,000 cards, you can now run Xenix 3. So we're able to go in and hack those modifications in there, which is great because the 8 megahertz cards for running Xenix are really difficult to find. They're pretty much, that term we use, unobtainium these days. The 6 megahertz cards are a lot easier to find. So this will allow more people to be able to run TRIS Xenix going forward. Then we moved to September, and September we had episode 17. This is where we really got close to Tandy Assembly, and this episode focused on discussing Tandy Assembly, and I invited all of the founders of Tandy Assembly on, or most of them. John Linville, Neil Blanchard, Randy Kindig, and myself. Mike Rowan is also a founder. He's actually the president of TA Vintage Events, which is the organization that runs Tandy Assembly. Then in October, we had episode 18. And this was our Tandy Assembly recap. And we also had an interview with Mr. Mike Etzko. We also had a little eBay shopping in this episode. And then our last episode of the year, episode 19, which was just recently, we had Mr. Paul Schreiber on, and we talked a little bit about TRS-80s in agriculture with Ian Maverick. So that was last year. So now we're coming up on 2018. So I was just wondering what everybody's plans were for 2018. Mav, you want to start? Do you have any plans for any new products in 2018?
I'm always sort of messing around with things to try to grow the hobby a bit and help others along the way with getting their machines up and running and expanded with useful things that will help them out. One of the things that in the last sort of 12 months to 2 years, a lot of Model 1 enthusiasts have been contacting me wanting to upgrade their systems with lowercase characters, which I always find kind of interesting because those of us who use them professionally back in the day, to people like us, every Model 1 had lowercase characters. It was just something you automatically did. But the actual truth of it seems to be that they're the exceptions, and the majority of the machines that were bought by home users out there were not upgraded with lowercase characters. And as people buy them these days and want to use things like emulated hard drive devices like Fred or Mize, it's best appreciated with lowercase. So they would want to buy the parts in order to do the lowercase modification to their computer. So one of the things I'm going to bring out next year is a proper lowercase modification for the computers. And I've got a couple of the parts here. This compared to some of my other products, these are really simple. But I'll just try and show you here.
Let me see if I can make you bigger here. Hold on.
Yeah.
Actually, if I bring this over here. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
So on the Model 1, the lowercase modification requires removing a old character generator, installing a new one. The character generator that Tandy used to supply, a Motorola part, is no longer available. And I used to be able to find them, but I can't even find them anymore. They're that hard to get. So what I have done is what you can see here that I'm holding up, I'll try to keep it in focus, is simply an EEPROM on an adapter board that goes where the old character generator is. The new character set with lowercase descenders is burned onto that chip. It's a low profile design so that it fits inside the case and you can still close the case without squashing it. And that replaces your character generator. The second part of it is a pair of stacked, let's see if I can get a zoom in there, 2102 1K by 1 bit RAM chips. That adds the extra bit that's missing on the original Model 1 design to allow you to have lowercase via a driver software, which is the standard way that it's done on the Model 1. So it'll be essentially the a reworked version of Tandy's simple lowercase modification. So they don't take me long to put together. I'm probably going to sell those for about $40 plus shipping for those who are after those sort of things. Another thing I'm working on is trying to get a DOM, a disk-on memory module system for the Model 2 together. I finally got myself a Model 2 a couple of weeks ago, which is working pretty well. So I'm going to push forward with a DOM system for those computers, so that people with the Model 2, 12, and 16 aren't as reliant on the floppy drives as the 8-inch floppy drives and media are starting to get a little bit worn out these days. So the disk-on memory system is pretty good for those things. And I'm working on a few other things for the Coco. I've just finished messing around with, I'm just trying to find it here, one of these, which is quite simply two EEPROM sockets and a gate here. It allows Coco people just to burn their own EEPROMs on a 2764 EEPROM, and then plug it into the cartridge port of their Coco, and they can make their own cartridges. They'll be fairly inexpensive, those things. They were just something I was messing around with, and continuing to sell Freds in various forms for people who are after hard drive emulation for their machines, and they keep doing all right at the moment. And yeah, and I'll be starting to produce some more Coco disc controllers because there's a shortage of Western Digital 1773 floppy controller chips. I couldn't get them at a reasonable price, but I've now found another supplier that has them at a price that works for me. So I'll be making a few more Coco floppy controllers in the new year as well. Yeah, and I've got to update my website because it's hopelessly out of date at the moment. But, you know, there's not enough hours in the day.
For your lower case kits for the Model 1, are you going to offer, you're only offering it as the stacked memory?
That's the easiest way to do it. Is well, it's kind of a lot of the things that I sell. I kind of agonize over what are all the different permutations of the machines out there, and those of you who know about the insides of the Model 1s. On the early ones, all the video RAMs were soldered in. However, on the later Model 1s, one of the video RAMs was always socketed, and that was to facilitate a quick upgrade to lowercase. You just unplugged you took out. Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah. On the early machines, you basically had to stick a static RAM chip on top of the other one, solder it all down except for 2 pins, and then run a couple of wires. On the later machines where they had the socket, Tandy supplied the 2 chips already stacked and soldered, ready to go. So you just prized out the old static RAM, plugged in the stack, soldered the 2 wires, cut a trace, and you were done. So the kit that I'm going to make will have the stacked chips with them. And I'm just hoping that most people that buy it will have the ability to unsolder the old chips as needed, and put these parts in. Bearing in mind that they were originally designed to be upgraded by a service centre, not by end users.
Well, the only thing is that based on the variety of skill level that you're going to run into with the custom spending of your valve, I was going to say you might want to consider offering the memory as 2 different versions. One as a double stack, which you could just unplug the chip and plug in itself a stack chip, or as a solder on. Because I think the biggest danger is customers trying to unsolder that chip and get it out of there. Now, whenever I take a chip out like that, I figure if I'm taking the chip out, it's wasted anyway. So the board you're trying to save, but you get way too many people thinking they have to pull that chip out as a solid piece, and then the process that they damage the board.
Yes, so, that's exactly right. I mean, I've done so many board repair over the last, or chip replacements over the last 30 years that I can get any chip out without damaging overheating the board traces or anything, and it's something that it's second nature. But I understand, there are a lot of sort of people who don't do this every day, so they so that it's possible that they damage the board. But I mean the chip destruction method you're mentioning works pretty well. You just clip all the legs off, and then with a soldering iron turned down to about 25 watts, you just remove each of the legs, suck through the holes, and you're good to go. It will be interesting. I'll be sort of seeing what, like a lot of the things that I sell, as well as selling them, I do sort of work email back and forth with the people that are buying them to make sure that in my mind they have the ability to perform the modification that they have in mind.
It was always easier though than cutting one out, and especially and I was going to say you might consider offering the memory chip as 2 different versions, one as a double stack and the other one as a single chip, but with the two pins bent up and the wire wrap solder and the little jumper tacked on already.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll probably do that.
Yeah, because the board's pretty much getting to the point where it's irreplaceable.
Definitely, yeah. No, I had thought of that, and that's a good idea. I'm sort of thankful for the confirmation of that. But yeah, it will. we'll see. The thing about the thing also about Model One enthusiasts, which is also interesting, is that the people that seem to use them the most gravitate towards the later ones with the better keyboards, with the Alps keyboard in it, and the ones produced in 1980 with the Alps keyboard in it invariably have the character generator and the static RAM chip already socketed, which makes them the easiest ones to upgrade, which is the ones that most people seem to use. But yeah,
Well,
fair
the ones
point.
with
Thanks
the
for
Alps
that.
keyboard were soon after they went to the Alps keyboard. The character generator was not only socketed, but when they ran out of the old character generator, they put the new character generator in place of it. So with a lot of the Alps
Yeah,
keyboard units, you don't even have to change the character generator. You just check the number and now you get an extra.
Yeah, I've found a few of those in my travels as well. Yeah, when people have sent me sort of unmodified machines for repair. Yeah, I've noticed that they come from the factory with the updated character generator in them, which is another thing I probably have to be mindful of when selling this kit, to try and help people identify if they've already got the correct part.
So who else has 2018 resolutions, projects, or things they plan on doing with their TRS-80s? Anyone? I know I do.
Randall Kindy probably has. What are you doing, Randy?
Sleeping.
Hello, Randy.
Well, I have a question. I'll just
Keep it
talk
warm.
about soldering boards and stuff, because I know I've seen a little bit of this briefly in the Cocoa world. Has anybody already done or proposed doing a footprint compatible drop-in board replacement for a Model 1, where you take out the old Model 1 board and you put in a new board that has modern components in it, but it still behaves like a Model 1?
Oh,
The
geez,
words-
how small would the board be? It'd be like 2 inches by 1.5
inches.
inch or something.
Right. But I'm saying, has anybody thought about doing that? Has anybody? Because I know that, I mean, there's a Cocoa on a chip being done right now. We have a
Yeah.
whole Cocoa on like a Xilinx FPGA. Has anybody proposed that for like a Model 1?
I've seen somebody did that, a project, an FPGA Model 1 project out there. I don't think he's produced it. He just did it as a one-off hobby kind of thing.
Just for fun?
Yeah.
Would current Model 1 people think that's sacrilege, or would they embrace that? I'm just curious.
Well, you have to look at it first off at what level you're going to do that. If you're going to redesign, if you're going to keep the flavor of the Model 1 and just have a single drop-in board, wouldn't it make sense to make it all memory?
Well, I mean, you can make it all static RAM. You wouldn't even have to have DRAM.
Well, not even that, but I mean, just like have all 48K in your keyboard.
Right. Well, I'm saying, I mean, you could make a Super Model 1, but it wouldn't run any faster, and it would still, you could still plug in the expansion box if you wanted to. It'd run the same floppies, it'd run the same code at the same speed. I mean, it wouldn't be a 300 megahertz Model 1, although you could do that.
Well, here's the thing. What if you took the Model 1 with the EI and the COM port and you put everything into the Model 1 case, if you're going to do it?
Sure.
Yeah, a company did that in the 1980s. They redesigned a Model 3 into a Model 1 case as an upgrade. Look, the thing about the TRS-80, particularly the Model 1, is that a lot of it are bought by nostalgic people who want the original equipment running. And fortunately, you know, it's easy to sort of knock the design of the machine from certain cost reduction aspects. But the fact is that the Model 1 itself is, you know, at this stage anyway, infinitely repairable. If the people are around and the parts are available, it's a good enough design and simple enough design that it can be repaired. So while on forums people have sort of said, why don't we replace the expansion interface, or why don't we replace the insides with a modern one? The fact is that most of the people who want to mess around with a Model 1 still are able to find the equipment, the original equipment, in good enough condition that it works, or needs a small repair to be put back into service. And so that kind of
really
kills. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, people like Peter Bartlett produced an updated, modernized version of the expansion interface called Mire, M-I-R-E, and it replaces the expansion interface. I did say to him at the time that he was designing it, he should lay out the circuit board so that it can be put inside the plastic enclosure of the expansion interface, but that didn't get any traction, unfortunately. But the people that have the Maya product as a replacement expansion interface are very happy with what it does, and it uses all modern, up-to-date technology, as well as a bunch of enhancements. So, things like that are sort of popular, but I think the main reason that no one's worked on a complete replacement for the insides of the Model 1 is that it's just too well designed, and people are finding that they're using the original one successfully.
And they're still plentiful available at a reasonable cost, right? So it's not cost effective to create a replacement at this time. And as long as we have this book, the TRS-80 Microcomputer Technical Reference Handbook.
Written by Paul Schreiber, isn't it?
No.
No, actually,
No?
it's Jerry Heap.
Yours.
Jerry Heap told me he wrote it, right?
Jerry Heap and Steve Weininger wrote it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. It's written in a very informal manner. I quite like reading it when I have to do stuff. It's a lot less, formal than some of the other Radio Shack technical guides that came after it.
I have one in my bathroom.
There you go. That goes too far. I'm sorry. Talking about bathrooms, Candy Paul remembers this. About 1984, they went to that new accounting system when we had to account for all our time down to a tenth of a minute, or a tenth of an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that on the project thing? And that's when, I forget who it was Hostin, I think. He came up with the idea of putting all the magazines like EDN and everything by the bathroom. So whenever you went into the bathroom, if you were going to be in there for more than a tenth of an hour, or for more than 6 minutes, you logged on your time sheet as research time.
Oh, that's clever. I was thinking this was going to get really stupid real quickly, but that's actually pretty clever.
Well, they had this other thing too, that for a while Candy was actually, for a very short time, they were counting our keystrokes. But like I shared a cube with Steve Pintel, and we had a Xenix system that was attached to the VAX, and then we each had a Candy 2000. So we didn't have this problem. But the people that were directly attached to the VAX, they had this software that was counting how productive we were typing. And I don't.
This is sounding like the bloody Gulag archipelago.
Well, one of the guys up on 13, they actually came up with this little software program that did nothing but open up a file, move lines around, and save it out. And it opened it up again, and move lines around and save it out. And so you were listed as being very productive all day long.
Oh, good come bonus time. Yeah.
I could tell you a story about bonuses, but I better not in this interview. So.
Anyone working on any software?
Oh, I am. So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm working on. So at the beginning of 2017, I mentioned one of the things I wanted to do was write a game. So I've been writing a lot of utility software. I wrote my TrustWiki Wikipedia browser and my Dropbox client for Model 2 and Xenix and the Model 1 and 3. But I really wanted to start looking into, game development on the Model 1 3 system. So I started writing one. I want to give a demo of it now. But I want to preface this in many ways by saying, I'm not intending this to be the greatest Model 1 game ever written. This is my first Z80 game. It's still in development. Any other caveats I can throw out there to downplay expectations? So let me bring it up here. I'm running this on an emulator. This is George Phillips' TRS-80 GP. Alright, so I'm going to start it fresh here. It's basically a version of Breakout. And if you haven't played that enough back in the day, let's see if I can get this loaded. It's running really slow because my system is overtaxed right now. Unfortunately, it doesn't run this slow, I promise you. Why is it running so slow?
An Apple?
Apple IIgs, yes.
It's a Z80, it's a machine language program. It runs a lot faster, I promise you. For some reason, because I have all this streaming software going now, my system's just overloaded. But eventually it's a version of Breakout, keeps track of scores and levels and lives. It has falling bricks. You can see that brick is starting to fall. So any brick that is not supported will start falling. I basically have the core mechanics working here. So that was one life dead. So this is another life. You can see the life indicator at the top now shows only one life left after this. God, it's so damn slow. Sorry, I didn't expect that.
I could write it in BASIC faster.
I know, right?
On a pocket computer.
Well, you have games to run. There's all kinds of things to get to run.
Did anybody ever officially write a game for the Model 2000?
Oh, yeah, Zaxxon. Oh, not there.
No, but I'm saying I never saw any games run on a 2000. Is there a Zaxxon?
Oh, you never saw Zaxxon? The arcade game Zaxxon?
Yeah, I know what it is.
Yeah, but that ran on the 2000. That was great.
No, I never saw
You have
it.
a copy because I collect 2000 stuff if you haven't worked out already, and I've never.
That's Gary Gygax, right? Uh-oh, did we all die?
Yeah, that's it.
Here.
Okay. It
Yeah,
just went really muted quiet all of a sudden.
Yeah, I got to kill this emulator. I think it's taxing my system.
It's become self-aware.
I was going to mention something earlier, and I didn't know how to interject it because we went by it. On the Xenix things, I'm assuming if you get your Xenix disc, you examine them very carefully.
Yes.
Because there was a lot of stuff hidden on all the TAR upgrade discs.
Yes.
There were drivers on the TAR upgrade discs to use Model 2000 keyboards on the Model 2. There were drivers to use the communications multiplexer 4-channel comp. Although those were coming out of 3068 memory. There was also drivers to I installed a small adapter to use either the KD1000 or the KD2000 mouse and calendar board. And if you were running the 5 1/4 inch hard disk on the Model 2 system, there was a driver that you could plug this board into the drive cable and was moving just the drive, and now you have also a clock calendar on the receiving system. What else do we have? You may know remember some of the stuff that showed up on the Phoenix Star Disc. Pretty small.
Was that the Rummy Buzzard thing, or is that something else?
No. The Rummy Buzzard, we won't. I talked about that before, so I won't bring that up again. No, but there was all this stuff. What it was is that I remember there was a stink about it because they were saying, why do we need to give out 6 diskettes for the TAR upgrade for the Phoenix? When they said, we only need 2 of that rest because there was always this stinky stuff out there. All these extra drivers and extra programs and stuff. And they were never part of the official releases, but they went out the door because the diskettes were both, were both duplicated, not just,
Yeah, I mean, this is just another interesting point about how there was a complete lack of any kind of what we would consider ISO 9000 sort of quality control at Tandy. I mean, people would just duplicate discs in their office and mail them out to people, all the time. I mean, it was just, there was no formal checks and balances about, it wasn't like a committee that said, okay, on this release, here's what's going out, and that kind of a thing. It was just, they were just in like complete open loop mode all the time. So there's no telling what went out on some of those discs.
It was great stuff. Games.
Great undocumented stuff.
There was a version of script that went out on Phoenix. I mean, there was
They had
a lot
scripts
of
on Xenix?
scripts.
Oh, scripts, yeah. Okay.
All right, guys, I have a demo video here of the actual gameplay in actual like high speed, so I'm just showing that. So the reason I wrote this game was not, like I said, to say, oh, this is the greatest game ever written for the TRS-80, but I really want to try to encourage a community of TRS-80 software development, because I know there are a lot of, really excellent engineers out there who have worked on the TRS-80 in the past, back in the day, and, maybe they want to get back into it and start writing some software. Some games, maybe some games with more of a modern take or modern influence that run on this platform, because it really is, writing Z80 assembly is very satisfying. It's challenging to learn, but once you do, if you're a programmer, it's.
So what do you use to write your Z80?
I'm using a assembler called ZMac that runs on my Mac. So I write the Z80 on my Mac. I assemble with ZMac, and then I either run the command file on my emulator, or I FTP it over to my Model 4 and run it over there. And ZMac will assemble a huge Z80 program in a fraction of a second, something that would take 10 minutes on a Model 1 or a Model 3 to assemble is less than a second, right? So it's a very efficient way of developing.
There was something satisfying about making a large Z80 program that could just had to do a lot of C to generate the code on a Model 2 with the LTS program. And all the messages and then finding a good result. There was something satisfying. I know I'm weird.
No, well, that's 2 of us.
No, when I do programs now, I write some programs now. I use Lazarus on my laptop, and I write these programs that have like 60,000 lines of code now up there, and they're like click, and you don't see the messages roll that says doing this many lines or something. It's sterile somehow. You get the processors, the multi-core processors and stuff, and it's like, okay, did I really do something? But it's like you're worried, does it really work?
Right. It's just satisfying working at such a low level, working basically at the metal, at the CPU level, at the instruction level, when for me personally, as a software engineer working with high-level languages for corporations, you know, many of the developers, the younger developers I meet, they have no concept of this. You know, that they've.
Well, the TRS-80 got me. I mean, I did with assembly, back in the DEC days in college, back in 1971. But it wasn't until the TRS-80 came along that I really got into assembly. And all the way forward until, oh my God, until maybe 2005, I never did anything but assembly on other processes or for anything. So 6811, 912, and, everything was always assembly.
Mm-hmm.
It started with the 80. Oh, and it was funny because when about 1970 or about 1981, there was one of those engineers, John Quicken, and he started to take a Model 1 and he wanted to convert it to address and data buses on lights and make like a deck or like an inside front panel for it. And he actually came up with the idea that he was going to change the V80 processor up to that next level of the V80 of the static, change all the memory to static RAM, and he was going to put a crank on the thing that every time as he turned the crank would generate a quadrature clock. And then so as you crank the machine, the single stuff that, I thought of, and he never got that far along with the project, but so, I mean, I think he built the light panel, for the LEDs, so he had this data about he didn't have to, made it kind of science fiction, like stuff like that. But I thought the crank idea, so that each single step is through by turning the crank, I thought that was a really neat idea for it.
So just one more picture I want to share here is keeping in spirit.
So does your program bring elements of Pong and Tetris together?
Exactly. Yeah. Although I do want to write a true Tetris clone. I'm not sure if there was a Tetris ever written for the Model 1. Was there?
It would have been a natural for the Model 1, but no, Tetris came along in the early 80s.
So maybe that'll be the next one I work on. Or maybe somebody else will take it up. I hope. So one of the things I also intend to do is package it in this retro way, create an actual manual in the same style as the old Radio Shack game manuals, and even probably sell it on cassette tape. Maybe that'll be the only way I sell it, to really keep the retro vibe.
It has to be leaderless cassette tape.
Well, vinyl records are more popular than ever now, so why not?
If you're selling it on a cassette tape, you can have a leader. The only thing you need a leader is what you were recording.
Yeah, if you're selling, it doesn't matter because it will just wait until it gets the sync header.
That's an artist's impression of your software packaging. It looks good.
Yeah.
The only thing missing is the thing that says 500 baud or model 3 select L instead of H.
I should only release in 500 baud, right, to be truly vintage.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah, so that'll be fun. So I'm just hoping to encourage others to get into it. Again, if you're at anywhere...
You got to glitch the tape when you play.
What's that?
You got to glitch the tape once or twice.
Purposely put a glitch in the tape.
Oh.
just kind of wrinkle it.
Oh, you
Just kind
remember
of keep...
the first cassette decks that Radio Shack shipped with the Model 1? They had a problem that if you stopped it while during the playback, it would actually glitch the tape. We had to put a caption on.
Amazing. Yeah.
So...
A question for the engineers. The engineers want a question?
Go ahead, fire away.
All right. I went and we had that short outage before. I went and grabbed that ArcNet card for the Tandy 2000. Are we able to zoom in on my picture, Pete?
Let me get the big one over there. Hold on.
So I've got it here. Well, it says on it ArcNet there and has its usual BNC connector.
Look at
and
that.
It looks a lot like a Tandy product. Is that one of yours, Mike?
I had an ArcNet card in my 2000, but I don't recall if it was an external one or an internal one.
By external, do you mean outside the computer or designed by Tandy?
No, designed by Tandy or not.
Okay, well this one...
With the 2000, there was a VNet application. It wasn't an operating system. You could just load it. And that actually got me in trouble because someone else... I was doing all the testing for modems for fall. And so I had the modems on my desk. And the 2212 had a speaker in it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Tandy had this phone system that when you dialed the long-distance number, if you went out on the Tandy lease line...
Wait, yeah. Go ahead. Wait, sorry. Go ahead. I just got the video up. Yeah, he's trying to show that corner, but I can't. It's still too blurry.
Well, yeah, it's going to come up too blurry. What it says is Tandy Corporation, copyright made in USA, 1984. It's a LEIA MV-1, 4884, which means 48th week of 1984.
Well, okay, LEIA, that's Leica. That's our board assembly company in San Antonio. So, all right. So that board was designed by DataPoint and built in a Radio Shack factory in San Antonio called Leica.
Okay.
Kind of like the camera company, but spelt with a K instead of a C. Yeah. So we had the mysterious board. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So that's
the smarts on it seem to be a COM 9026. And it looks like it's got a 128 kilobyte static RAM on it.
Mav, Aaron Brockbank is asking, is the main processor chip a 9026?
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that design was, I guess, licensed by Tandy, but it was built and supported by Tandy. So it was built in a Tandy factory and sold, through Radio Shack and with Tandy support, but it was not a Tandy design.
Okay.
The only thing I did on it was I sourced that white Molex BNC connector.
Yeah.
So I was in charge of, this is such a long time ago. So like I said, I did all the peripheral cards for the 2000 and so I was in charge of like the BOM, and so when you held the board up, some neurons fired that haven't fired,
Yeah.
And I remember my big contribution was the so hold the board up, you'll see the white BNC connector on there.
Yeah.
And so I did the chip placement. So we went to a third party to do the physical PC board design for it. It has the hybrid, the mysterious, the little black thing. That's a ceramic.
What the hell is this thing?
Okay, so that little black square to the left of the BNC connector, that is a subboard which is built on ceramic instead of fiberglass. Okay, and so that's what we call in the world and on the ISO layers. That's the physical layer. So that's actually the transformer and the coax driver that drives the actual circuit, the electrical signal. So that's an analog board. So that's analog.
Okay.
So that's driving.
See, I remember the advertising. I remember the advertising for the ViaNet system that was in Radio Shack computer catalogs, and you saw pictures of things like the 2000 sitting next to a 1200, sitting next to a 6000, sitting next to a Model 12, and so on, and sort of stylized, connections between them, in typically
Well,
80s
trust me,
graphics and everything.
95% of what was shown was completely faked.
Yeah.
Okay. I got into a tiff with John Roach, our CEO, over the Model 2000 official PR photo, which was on the cover of the Intercom, which is our internal Radio Shack magazine that came out every month, a printed magazine, where if you look closely at the picture, you see a Model 2 on the floor behind the desk with my rear end sticking out behind a potted plant where I'm actually driving the graphics shown on the screen, and the Model 2 isn't even plugged in. In fact, it has it anticipated Wi-Fi because it has a keyless, a wireless mouse and keyboard also. So,
Look, it wouldn't be the first time. I mean, if you go looking through those old Radio Shack computer catalogs, it's pretty easy to see in this era of photoshopping how badly the screenshots are. That virtually every computer is photographed switched off, and then the your photographics or publication department would put a representation of what they thought was supposed to be on the screen, there, and
For the
I don't think there was.
time, a lot of the Radio Shack screenshots were, what they did is the photograph department was trying to experiment with all kinds of different ways of getting a good screenshot. And for a lot of the early stuff up to Model 3s, what they were doing is they would get a display on their screen, and one of the artists would come over and actually write on the screen with a white paint, copy the screen in paint onto the glass, and they turn it off, and then they take the photo. And the photo was actually a photograph with the paint over what was supposed to be on the screen.
Yeah. As a restorer and reseller of Model 1s and 3s and 4s, I have to say that even now getting a good screenshot, even with all the digital cameras and everything we've got these days, is still rather difficult. Must have been even more annoying back in the days of film.
So thanks for showing me that ArcNet board that I forgot. You have to understand that on average, this is not bragging, this is more complaining than bragging. The average engineer at Tandy simultaneously worked on 4 projects and tried to complete 6 to 10 a year. And we weren't part of a team. There was no team at Tandy. That concept was not really. I think probably the Model 16B was the first more than one person project at Tandy. It was one guy, one project, by herself. And we're talking everything from designing the circuitry to writing the manuals. One guy, one project. And so you did so many and so quickly that you didn't even have time to think about it.
I'm glad I got this card because, to be honest, this is the only one I've ever seen on eBay in sort of 20 years of looking for rare Tandy items. This is the only time I've ever seen an ArcNet card. It didn't even cost me that much, but I've never seen one before or since.
Because we only sold probably 200 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, how much was it in the catalog? Did you go back and see what the original retail?
The big problem was the infrastructure for the card. Andy was selling the passive boxes for $100, I think, $99, and the active boxes at first, they were $1,000, and there wasn't even maybe $20 of parts in that thing, but because of licensing, Andy wouldn't discount the product.
Yeah.
He
But I can understand why they'd only sell like a couple of hundred of these boards, because like I said, until I'd actually got my hands on the board, there's no reference in any of the Radio Shack computer catalogs that I could see talking about
Well,
the
I do know
2000
that one of the
ArcNet card.
sites, I do know that at least one of the sites that used ArcNet used a lot of them. There was almost maybe close to 200 Model 2s ArcNet into that system.
That's a DOD, was it?
I'm not sure I should say where it was.
I mean, we had some success with ArcNet as a whole. Okay, I mean, and mainly that was all for legacy systems. I mean, people used ArcNet who already had ArcNet. Does that make sense?
It's interesting you say that because you know, I would imagine that those that used ArcNets would build really large internal networks for the ArcNet system. Though the fundamental problem is that as far as finding these parts on the used market, you know, they're even rarer than some of the rare software titles out there. They finding these things is real.
Because they wound
really
up
tough.
because people just threw them away when they bought a compact 286
Yeah.
and started running Ethernet.
Yeah, well, a company that's got a 200 system ArcNet would probably throw the whole system once it's been replaced into landfill, whereas a home user who finishes using, you know, their Model 4 are more likely to put it back in a box and in the attic, and that's why they turn up, you know, in the used market these days. Whereas, yeah, a lot of stuff just got thrown straight into trash.
Well, ArcNet did have some advantages. There was a lot of technical advantages to it. Ethernet at the time, you were pretty much limited to one of three things. You had to use that DB15 AUI down to an active box, which is extremely expensive, or you had to use the RP8 equivalent with the squad shield with foil and everything with vampire taps. Everything was extremely expensive for Ethernet. And when Ethernet even went down to RP58 cable, then you had to put key connectors on everything. So you couldn't have a single cable going to your computer. You had to go from computer to computer to computer to computer. And then one guy kicks a connector, breaks it on the back of his computer, and now the whole network's been dead. And ArcNet at least had that advantage of being that star configuration instead of the serial, drop-off connection kind of thing. Although the price of the ArcNet passive and active hub is incredibly high for what was in them.
No, that's cool. I think we've done ArcNet to death for the moment.
Just one more ArcNet item. Aaron Brockbank has reminded me via the YouTube chat that he did send me a version of the Model 2 application processor, TRS-80 4.3 disk. So I do have a version of that, but we are still missing the file processor. So the application processor without the file processor is, not really useful. So if anybody out there has a copy of the file processor, please get in touch. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here, I think. The only thing I'm looking forward to and going to work, as hard as I have the past couple of years is trying to build up this TRS-80 community. I'm so jealous of the Coco community. They have so much activity going on, so many products being made, so much software being written, and investment and interest in the community. And I feel like, we're not at that level. So I'm not sure why that is, because I think there were more TRS-80 sold than color computers. It might be the fact that they were younger at that time, and those fellows are now more active than maybe the older TRS-80 community. I'm not sure, but could be, right?
Color computer has an advantage in that there was a single interface point, with the cartridge.
Yeah,
Whereas
true.
with the TRS-80 Model 1, 3, 4 line and 212, 16, whatever, there were multiple interfaces. But you can't say that, even though the software for the Model 1 was pretty much compatible with the Model 3, there wasn't a single interface point, that would be a standard. You're close with the 50-pin connector on the bottom of the Model 3, but not like the cartridge for the color computer.
I think it's even different than that. I think that the color computer is seen by the people who like it as something that's a unique thing, okay? That it's like its own little special entity. There's nothing before or after except, the clones like the dragons and all that kind of stuff. But taken into itself, it's its own unique little thing. It's kind of like if you're a car collector and you like Cords and Auburns, okay? They came out for 4 years and there were only, so many made, and they're their own unique thing, and that's what kind of makes them attractive. Whereas I think the TRS-80 line in general, it's lumped under the whole guise of personal computer. It's kind of lumped with Commodore and Apple and IBM and stuff. It's part of computers in general. It's not, Model 2000, you can argue, is really the unique one in the line. The rest, and maybe to some degree the 16 and the 6000s, but I think a lot of people just view it as a natural progression, and they don't see a reason to go back. It's like, why should I go to a slide rule since I have a calculator? Sort of.
My thoughts on this. My thoughts are that it would be that Model 1, 3, and 4. I find them far more interesting than Coco's, but I'll be the voice of reason here and say that if you're a small business owner or a home computer user and you're cashed up in the late 70s or early 80s, you would look around at what Commodore offers, what Apple offers, and whatever, and see which fits your needs, and you'd buy a Model 3 or 4, and you bought it to do the job you wanted, whether it was spreadsheets or word processing or whatever. Whereas with the Coco, a lot of the original buyers in the 1980s were school kids who had to, save for 6 months, doing chores and odd jobs or paper rounds or whatever kids did in the 80s to get to scrape together the coin in order to buy the thing. So it was a real achievement to finally walk into Radio Shack, plunk, drop down your 400 coins, $1 coin. What do you call a dollar coin there?
Bill. Dollar bill.
A bill. Oh, we have the dollar coin here in Australia, don't mind us. You put down your $101 bills and walk out with your Coco. You connect it to your television, and it fascinates you. Whereas if you're a small business person and you've decided, I need a simple database system or something, you buy your Model 3 and your Profile 3 Plus and your Daisy Well printer, and you spend a lot of money, but you're back working, and then once it's done, it's 4 or 5 or 6 years of work. You're looking on to the next computer, and really it's just a continuation of your enterprise. A tool to keep your enterprise going. Not all of them are like that. Obviously, I was a teenager and overlooked the Coco and was fascinated the whole time with the Z80 machines and found them perfectly adequate for everything that I wanted to do. And that's why I think that the color computer people are still kind of so sort of drawn to that machine in that a lot of them, teenagers or younger at the time, had to do a lot of work to get their hands on one, as opposed to just walking in with a charge card and walking out with a Model 4.
And we haven't talked about the Model 1000 because that was after I left. In the time period, I worked at Tandy 2 times, and the Model 1000 stuff was all done in my gap. In my gap, did any of the Model 1000s have color?
All of them.
Okay, so they were like the PC Junior, so they had color.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Model
It was.
1000 the Model 1000 was supposed to originally be a PC Junior clone.
Right.
And then in the last second, the Tandy realized how bad the PC Junior was, so they very quickly turned it into a mini XT. But it kept all the enhancements of the ones of the PC Junior, like the multicolored graphics. Well, you did the sound for that.
Well, yeah, that's just a TI chip. That's the last thing I did before I left, and that was just, and they tried not to do the TI sound chip, but they went ahead and used the TI sound chip. But I didn't really pay much attention to it because that was like 6 weeks before I left. I had other thoughts in my mind, like, get out of here. So I guess, the fact that the color computer is, duh, it's in color. Probably has a lot of attraction. I mean, think about it.
I mean, there is a.
1000 the color with the PC Junior graphics, and Sierra Online Systems came out with the games and supported it, and that's really what made the 1000 such a big hit. If they had the King's Quest and the
Right.
Leader 2 Larry games, with the sound and the color graphics, it was phenomenal.
So, since you guys know, does anybody really collect Model 1000s, or because no one has said Model 1000 in 2 hours here?
Well,
Okay, and so I'm just curious: are they to a TRS-80 purist? Are they not even looked at? Are they kind of below the radar as like this little weird side thing?
it's a
I'm
different
just curious.
different
We
subgenre.
need that guy. That guy here? Who was the guy who bought the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 to the Tandy Assembly? What was his name, Pete?
I forget. They're
Sorry if you're listening to this that it was that your name was so
yeah.
Forgettable, but
They're kind of in a weird place between the PC enthusiasts and the Tandy enthusiasts. They're in that middle ground.
yeah, I'll answer this because I follow eBay's closed auction listings, and the Tandy 1000s, when they're working, they actually do sell for good money, almost as much as a Model 3 or 4. Now, the people that buy them are they're not into the history of Tandy. They're interested in getting the most out of those 80s games. I suppose I call them DOS games that looked crappy on CGA. They look good on EGA and look great on Tandy's TGA or whatever the graphics was. And also the special sound chip in the Tandy 1000 really brought these 80s games to life. So there are people who collect old Tandy 1000s for that purpose, but they're quite distanced from the Z80 and Coco purist and experimenter types. They're really just after these old games to get them running.
It's just a platform to play the game.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
it's just a platform, because I knew that when I came back to Tandy, I couldn't keep all the different Model 1000 straights. I mean, there were like 7 different Model 1000s.
Oh yeah, it went
HL,
stupid.
TL, TX, TX, TLD. It was like every 2 letters of the alphabet there was a Model 1000 for it.
Yeah,
Even 82, 86 versions.
Yes, they did. Yeah, the TX had I bought a TX when it went on fire sale at Tandy, and it has an 80286, but running through a 816-bit bus, so it completely. I think the 286 in it must just sit there bored half the time because it's really
weight state.
Yeah, it's an XT class computer. Really nice computer I have to say, construction wise. The Tandy 1000s, I thought they were really well built. The ones that I had to deal with, but yeah, by the end they had a million different variants. They had home computer versions which looked like a Coco on steroids, and I don't know whether they were testing the market with trying to kill off the Coco if people would buy a Coco-sized PC compatible. If it was the right price, the EX and HX is what I'm talking about. They were cheap, and people that have them, I don't know, they did the jobs they wanted because they were on the catalogue for a long enough time.
My dad had an HX.
Your dad had one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then they had
Okay.
they had the HX with DOS and ROM.
That's the one. Yep. Did you get him the company discount for it? Did you?
No, I was long gone from Sandy when they came out. I left in '85.
Okay.
There was still just the original 1000 I was at. The 2000 was out. The 3000 was just about designed. It was just about released.
Yep. So they're their own small community, although not as small as, say, the Tandy Xenix community. But
So how about, I guess my last question is what about the was it the 5000 was the microchannel one?
right.
So
Yeah.
are any of those still around and working?
There's one.
There was one at Tandy Assembly. Yeah.
So there is at least one that we know of that's working.
Yes.
Does
And
it
he actually
work?
bought it. Here's an interesting story. He actually bought it when they emptied out Tandy Towers in Fort Worth and decided to auction everything through that auction house. They turned up a Tandy 5000. So this gentleman who brought it to Tandy Assembly, he paid a fair bit for it. I think it was like in the $400 range for a computer that wasn't working. Though it did come with a reference disc, and he was able to eventually get it working. But yeah, as a collector, I wanted one for ages, and then realised that they'd never brought them out to Australia, and also that they never. I think only one had previously come up on eBay, so it was almost like it was a terminated product that they sent a few beta test ones out and never actually released it. It almost feels like.
You have to ask. I'll get a hold of Rick Thompson, who's the designer of that. He's in the Dallas area still.
Okay.
He would be someone you could
Are you
talk to
going
about
to
it.
for your review list?
Yeah, I've actually chatted with Rick, and he said after the new year to get back in touch with him. So we may have him on the show soon.
That'd be good.
Yeah, he had some pretty epic battles with Bernie Appel over the cost of that system.
Yeah.
The microchannel connectors, okay, which were by Molex, I think they were like $27 a piece for the connector.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of my first jobs was working in the rollout of IBM PS2 microchannel systems, and they were super. I mean, even basic microchannel machines like the Model 50 and Model 55 were like an order of magnitude more in terms of cost than a PC from Tandy or from Compaq. So the idea when it was released, the 5000, I thought, oh, okay, I wonder what, I like microchannel. I'd like to buy a machine with a Tandy name on it that's a microchannel one, but how are they going to do it in a price that's better than, that's a whole lot better than IBM? And while they did, it still made it their most expensive computer for 1991 or 89 or whenever it was released.
It was around
the most
1990, I think, yeah.
Yeah, it was the most expensive computer in the Tandy catalog. And
the question was, what does it do different than anything else?
Yes,
right?
that was.
I mean, what's the compelling reason? And that again is part of the whole demise of the whole thing, is that you had no one driving the boat. It was all kind of suggestions by random people and agreed to by, certain committees, and then did Bernie like it, yes or no? I mean, we didn't have any kind of strong person going, there was a company, I think they're still around, Mike knows them, called DataQuest. And DataQuest was a data mining company for the computer industry, and you could spend $10,000 every year, and you would get the DataQuest. There's like 1,200 printed pages of every single manufacturer and computers, and it's sliced and diced, in trends and who's number one and blah blah blah. And Tandy would just ignore that kind of stuff. And probably the whole reason we did a microcomputer was probably at one of Bernie Appel's little Shark Tanks. Rick Thompson said, I don't know, let's do a microchannel because we're out of ideas. In other words, you would think that they had this master plan, and they would say, okay, we're going to roll this out and this out, and we have these features, and like next year we're going to double the memory, and we're going to, make the product. No, there was absolutely none of that. When I say none of that, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, zero.
Well, with the benefit of hindsight, I mean, the whole project's completely bonkers. IBM came out with the microchannel machines in 1987, and it was pretty obvious by about the middle of 1988 that really they were not taking off. They were not taking off the way that they hoped they would, and the only people that were really buying them were people that already had a IBM network built around XTs and ATs and AS400 server applications. So as they get to the end of their life cycle, they're replacing them with IBM PS2s. So assuming that they started on the drawing board of the Tandy 5000 around 1989, they already knew that it was a technology that was kind of doing a similar thing to the Tandy 2000, in that it was fantastic for the things that it was good at, but for the majority of people that are likely to buy the thing, it was just, it could be done. The same thing could be achieved for much less.
Well, and then you had the whole thing about OS, was it OS Warp or whatever it was called? Was it that?
OS2 and then OS2 Warp.
Right.
I'm a hardware person. I know that was part of their whole system, that their holistic system, so that their minis, mainframes, and PCs all ran the same interface, right. which was good for IBM, but it didn't make any sense for it. Then it didn't make sense for people to make IBM microchannel compatible equipment.
And if you also remember, right at that time, there was going to be a bus change because Compaq changed CEOs, and the new Compaq CEO wanted to make a statement, and so he wanted to do something called the EISA bus.
Yeah, EISA, enhanced ISA.
Right, which had this weird staggered pins on it, kind of like the, the video bus now has.
You could still plug an ISA card in, and right, that's the thing. If you didn't want to use the ISA function, you could still plug an ISA card in, and that was the whole thing.
It would sneak the extra signals in between the pads, right? So there was like secret pads where there used to be spaces. They snuck a pad in there.
Yeah.
And it turns out that if you went to a board manufacturer at that time, they would triple the price of your board.
Yeah.
Because
anyway, I think we're moving away from TRS-80 stuff at the moment, but yeah.
No, I'm talking about MC. I'm talking about the Model 5000. I just think it's interesting about those later computers that aren't mentioned. It's like, again, just listening to you guys talk, it's like it starts with the Model 1 and it ends with the Model 2000. And that seems to be where the interest, I'm trying to get an idea of where the people's interest lie. And it sounds like that's the two bookends. This Model 1 on one side, 2000 on the other. That everything past the 2000 is in that bell curve down in the 1% area of interest.
Well, I think you have to keep in mind that
even the 2000 is part of that. Actually, the interest of the two bookends from my perspective are the 134 and the cocoa. There's a small but growing number of Model 216 people heralded by Peter Satinsky, and everything else is kind of got so low in numbers that the number of collectors and users could be counted on one hand.
Right, so I'm trying to address Peter's question about how to grow it, and it sounds like where the growth and interest is models 1, 3s, and 4s. Is that true?
Still is.
yeah, that's the largest, definitely the largest section.
Okay, yeah, that's in my roundabout way. 20 minutes later, that's what I'm trying to get at.
And I think that's maybe predominantly driven because of the availability of the hardware. The 1s, 3s, and 4s are just so much more available than, say, a 16 or a 6000, maybe. Easier, they're more reliable, easier to maintain. Easier to ship.
In terms of the shipping.
Yep, definitely.
Just packing and shipping, right? I mean, if somebody in Australia once finds a dead mint Model 3000 HL in Ohio, it would cost as much to ship it there as it would to buy it.
Yeah, and a lot of the machines don't ship well either, and they'll get destroyed in shipping. So I've had a few of those. So we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank our guests, Mike and Paul, for joining us. I want to thank everybody joining us on the YouTube stream. Dusty from TRS-80 joins us on the stream. I just want to shout out to Dusty. Thank you for your newsletter. Keep up the good work, Dusty. We love it. And thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Okay.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.